questions you might have. So feel free to email applications@mocha.com, or during the live, if you want to get your questions answered, type them in on either in the comments on the video, either on Facebook or YouTube. That's where they're streaming right now. So give me a moment to get up on my other monitors, the lives, so I'll be able to see your questions. And this is our design. There's Facebook, and let me go get YouTube. YouTube makes me reload it to find them. There it is. Okay. Cool. All right, so now I can see comments on both YouTube and Facebook. If you see me looking over to the side, that's what I'm doing. I've got a second monitor up so I can check any questions as we're live here today. So we had a few questions that were emailed in over this week, so we'll start with those and then go on to the ones that were typed in and some of the groups where I was polling for questions. And again, feel free to type them in on the posts. So let's see, let's get started. Basically, this is a long question asking, how do I use the calligraphic serif font for larger things like 1.6-inch lettering? Okay, and what settings should I use is really what all that's asking. So let's start there. So there was some feedback that people were having a hard time following my cursor, so I'm trying something a little different to see if that helps. I made it a little bigger and changed the color of it, so maybe that helps some. Let me know if the green is distracting to me, but if it helps, I'm all for it. All right, so to create text, I'm going to go, first off, start on the text icon, and wow, the larger thing. I'm going to change it to the calligraphic serif. Good morning, Peggy in Texas. Welcome. All right, so, and we said we wanted this closer to 1.6. So what I did is up here, I just typed in the 1.6, hit enter, and then I'm going to go ahead and center it. That's a good practice to do. All right, so let's see what we've got so far. That's what it looks like, and just looking at that, even though the height's 1.6, personally, I'm not a big fan of having this go from a satin to fill back to satin. So what is driving that? Well, first we got to go into the properties. So to do that, you select your object. You can either double click on it or right click on it, which is what I did, and then click on properties. It'll get you to the same property screen. So this fill in the middle of it where it's flopping back and forth between satin and fill, that's being driven by a property down here under the top stitch tab, right here, this guy. So use fill for stitch lines greater than. So basically what that's saying is for any stitch that's going to be longer than whatever number you have here, which is 60 points, it's going to convert that over into a fill. So I've got satin, that means starting right about here, my stitch length is longer than 60, so it's making it fill. When doing larger lettering like this, I've really taken a liking to this auto split. I don't know why. It is a personal preference, but what I would suggest doing is playing with the different settings to see what looks best to you. And you'll find everyone has different preferences one way or the other. But I've taken to really liking the auto split, and particularly when it's going in a larger size, I'll usually put the density down closer from, to 3.5 to 3.7, someone in there. Good morning, Brian and Lorena. All right. So, anyone on YouTube yet? A quick look. Nope. All right. So everyone's on Facebook today. Okay. So I like the auto split look personally, but again, it is personal preference. You can also try some of these different fills if you want a different look, and that'll add kind of a patterned fill through there. I tend to prefer that better over just a random or default fill. It's, like I said, it's just a personal preference. So I would start there as for the larger size, decreasing your density a little bit. And for underlay, using auto, the auto properties on there are actually really nice. So you can do that unless you know an underlay you particularly like. With embroidery, everything shrinks somewhat, so I tend to always include at least 1 point of pull offset on everything I do. All it's doing is it's making it a little bit bolder so that when it shrinks up, it's actually where you want it to be. Okay, so 1 to 3 points. If you're going over 3, that's probably a little excessive. And then, of course, make sure you have your tie-in and tie-outs. So under your tie-in and tie-offs, you've got these enabled, and that'll get rid of those jump stitches between the letters, and make sure you have your knots secured. Okay, so that's probably what I would do for a 1.6 inch lettering, the settings I would use. And sew it out, see what you like. If you don't like the auto split look, then try one of the other patterns and see what, what strikes your fancy, what looks best to you. Okay. So what other questions do we have? Let's see. How do I resize a, so this font is showing a jump stitch on some letters. Okay, so if you're talking about like the jump between the dot on an I, you're not going to get rid of those. You'd have to convert it over to a wireframe and then add a trim in. Those are actually put in there on purpose. But if you're talking between letters, you just need to change your auto trim properties. So like if you had a jump stitch from here to the M, for instance, if you go into the properties in your tie-in and tie-outs, make this number smaller. This number usually defaults at 64, and which I personally think is pretty long for a jump stitch. So I would suggest changing that, somewhere between 20 and 30 seems to be a good place to start. So can you change these properties in DesignShop Lite? Yes, you can. Yes, you can. Brian, what program are you running to show the screen? OBS. So I'm using OBS and Restream, so it goes on the multiple platforms. Okay, so let's see. We have a question on YouTube. What's the best distance between needle points to ensure the best results? Well, if you're using a 7511 needle, your needle is roughly 7 points. So you wouldn't want needle penetration smaller than 7 points, because you're going to be essentially stabbing it in the same spot, the same hole that's opened. I would say anything over 10 is okay. Personally, I prefer to stay over 12 points. So 12 points between needle penetrations is kind of where my bottom limit is, but you can go down to 10. And if you're using a 65 9 needle, you can even go smaller than that. So, but a 7511 needle, you're roughly at 7 points for the diameter of the needle. So staying above 10 is safe. All right. Let's see. The question on DesignShop Lite, modifying these properties. Yes, you can, particularly on text. Okay. So what other questions? I think the next one was on graphics. So I just want to make sure I covered all this. Covered the settings I like. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, you want to sew it at some sort of fill, essentially, the larger you go. And then we talked about the jumps. All right, so how do I resize a graphic? So let's go over to DesignShop. Okay, so I'm going to start a new file. I'm going to go Insert. So I just clicked Insert. You guys have these graphics. I just go there because everyone has them. If you go to your C drive, Designs, and then Graphics. My husband dropped something downstairs. Oops. All right, so let's see. I'm going to pull up, let's just do the lines one. Okay, so I'm going to pull up lines.bmp and say open. And there you go. That brings in a graphic. So when you're doing, when you're digitizing, you always want to make sure your graphic is sized to the size you want your design to be. So let's say you're doing it for a hat and you want your design to be roughly 2 inches tall. You wouldn't want to take this, which is currently 4 inches tall. Not that I'd want to put this on a hat, but you get the idea. You wouldn't want to take digitize it as 4 inches and then shrink it down, because it's just going to create more work for yourself. Okay, so how do you scale a graphic? Well, if you know the exact height that you want it to be, and you know your graphic goes from top to bottom, you can come over, select your graphic over in your right hand side over here. Then down at the bottom where you see the width and height, you can just highlight what you want to change. And let's say I'm going to make that 2 inches, hit enter, it scales it down. Now, what if, a lot of times when I bring in graphics, I want my graphic doesn't go full bleed from edge to edge of the picture itself. So scaling it, I end up playing guessing games a lot if I go by numbers down here, trying to make, let's say, this distance 2 inches between those circles. Okay, so a trick I like using is I'll take just any walk element or a vector line, it really doesn't matter what, and I'll draw a line, and then I'll scale that line to the size I want it to be. So, all right, that's just luck. That's roughly 2 inches wide. Okay, so then I can select my graphic, get it close, and then just hold my control key and drag it, and I can move it around until my graphic matches the distance of there. So all I'm doing is scaling it by dragging it around. And you'll see I still haven't gotten it to the 2 inches, but you can also measure it here using this ruler tool right there. So if I click from one point to the next, you'll see how big it is currently. Okay, so that's just another idea, is particularly if your graphic is not full bleed and you don't want to crop it down, you can always just scale it by some sort of reference. What program am I using? This is DesignShop. Pro Plus is the one I'm using at the moment. I can change it to the different levels. Okay, but yeah, I tend to just draw a vector and scale my graphic until I'm happy with it and to the right size. So let's see. There was another question typed in. I don't want to miss it. Where was it? Oh, after stitching most words, there are threads that come loose. Why is that? Okay. Typically, when things are coming loose, it generally has to do with your tie-in and tie-out properties. Particularly with lettering, if you're creating lettering that you have no tie-in and tie-outs, what's going to happen is when the machine goes to trim, it's just going to shove the needle to the bottom, execute a trim, and now you got 2 threads hanging out on the back. So what happens over time? It's going to come unraveled, right? Well, what you want to do is lock those threads together in some format. So to do that, I'm going to just type a letter. This is the block format, similar to what you were using. And you can see right here is my knot, my tie out. That's a style 1 tie out. It's in line. It kind of buries well within there, but you need some sort of lock stitch to really hold those threads together. In the same way, you also need that as your tie-in. So right when your machine starts sewing, you want to make sure it does some sort of lock stitch, and you just don't jump straight into your top stitching, because what's going to happen? You just have threads hanging out, and eventually they're going to come unraveled. All right. So where do you get those properties and how do you check them? So select your element, double click on it. That's one way. You can right click, go to properties. Over in your project view here, you can double click on the element you want to check. You can right click properties. It all takes you to the same place. So there's a lot of ways to do the exact same thing. So here, that's under this tie-in and tie-off properties. If your lettering set up like this, it's going to come unraveled all day long because it's going to execute a trim, and you are going to, it's just going to shove the thread to the back, and eventually it'll come undone. So you want to make sure you have a tie-in. This is the series of stitches that are made right when the machine's about to start. So it's going to lock the top and bottom thread together. So your top threading and bobbin, lock them together so that when you start sewing, they're connected and they're not just dragging around. So that's your tie-in. Your tie-off are the series of lock stitches that are made right before a trim. So it's been sewing, blah, blah, blah. Now we're going to go do a series of lock stitches close together to knot those threads together. So when it does a trim, it doesn't come unraveled. Now this auto trim is what's governing when is it going to trim. Okay. How do we reduce the number or change placement of jump stitches in text? Susie, when you ask that, I'm not focused. What's not focused? Okay. So how do we reduce the number of jump stitches in text? Do you mean like on an I, or do you mean jump stitches from letter to letter? Because that is what is right here on your tie-in and tie-outs. This number right here is what's governing from letter to letter on your trims. Okay. Oh. Good morning, Edith. Is anyone... I've got the live feeds both up on YouTube and Facebook, and they are not showing blurry to me. From letter to letter. Okay, so let me know if anyone else is having troubles or with the screen being blurry, if it's just a YouTube thing or if it's also on Facebook. All right, so from letter to letter, it's this auto trim. Okay, the smaller this number, the more trims you're going to have. Okay, so the screen looks good, as Melko's saying, so great. All right, so this is the number that's going to say, let me actually just demonstrate it. So if I've got multiple letters, let's do that, Sam. Zoom out. Notice I have no trims. All right, so I'm going to go to Properties, go to my tie-in and tie-outs, and I'm going to make it really big. All right, so you'll see I've got all these jump stitches, which is what we don't generally want. But what that number is right here, it's saying from where this letter ends, where that red X is, to where this letter starts, that green circle, so that distance. If I measure from here to there, it's got to be bigger than this number in order for it to have a trim. Okay, so if I make that smaller, down, let's say 20, now it puts a trim in. Okay, that's because the distance from here to there is bigger than 20 points. Okay. Pamela, I'm not sure why it's blurry for you. I know some of the other folks on YouTube and on Facebook both say it's showing up clear on their end. So maybe it's a connection issue. I'm not sure. I wish I knew. I'm sorry. Okay, so let's see. When do you use only when necessary, and when do you use always in regards to tie-in and tie-outs? I tend to always use always, which will put, most people don't want to use only when necessary. Let me start there. So I would say most commonly you're going to want to use only when necessary, because that way you don't have a whole bunch of tiny stitches that aren't necessary. Now, I tend to use always because I never know when customers are going to go grab their little scissors and start snipping on any jump stitches that I leave. So if they're dragging little jump stitches across, leaving them on there, and then trimming them later, if I don't put a knot in, it tends to come apart. Okay, so I tend to use always, but it's just a lot of my clients like trimming threads out that here and there. So that is what I tend to use. Someone on YouTube, when I buy designs from digitizers, what format should I request to ensure that the colors of the design show up correctly in DesignShop? That's a good question. All right, so that's actually another question that I had coming up. So I think, yeah, it's down here. All right, let's hold that thought for a minute. Let me do these real quick. Are there adjustable guides available and not just grid marks? No, there's not, but I'll show you some tricks you can use. So the grids, when you turn on the grids, you've got your main grid here, and then you got these subspacings. Let's say you don't like the 1/2 inch spacing that it defaults to and you want to do something else. You can come to the grid icon, right click on it, and you can change the spacing to whatever you want. You know, if you want 1 inch spacing or 1/4 inch spacing to get more refined, whatever it is, you can change your grid here. You can even change the color of it. Okay, so that's one way you can do it, to adjust the grid to yours, whatever you like. I use these vector lines a lot for guidelines. So instead of dragging like you would in Illustrator or some other things, I literally just draw vector lines for whatever I'm doing and use those as my guidelines for, you know, and what you're asking. I think what you're asking is, can you just drag them around like you can in, let's say, Illustrator? No, you can't, but you can use vectors to get a similar effect. Okay. Let's see, did I miss any others? All right, let's go back to here. When is version 11 coming? I don't know. I saw some stuff on Facebook earlier this week, I think. So soon? I'm not sure. So I know about as much as you do on that front. But keep your eyes out. I'm assuming it's not going to be too long, but who knows. What suggestions can I give for doing lettering in DesignShop on straps and dog collars? Okay, so let's go to DesignShop and set up a file for that. So let me close the mess I've made so far. I'm going to create a new file. So first off, you got to know a little bit of information. So let's say we're going to do 1-inch webbing and we're going to try to sew a name on it. All right, so I'm going to go just create a vector fill and oops, let's create a vector fill. I'm going to use this rectangle tool, and this is just a guide so I can mock up my webbing. Okay, so I'm going to make sure it's 1 inch tall, so select the vector, then down here, and I'm going to type 1, hit enter. So now I've got 1 inch high. So where do you position this? Well, you can put it center, but keep in mind when you go to your machine and you tell it to center a design, where is it going to go? The needle is going to be positioned right on the origin, which is where these red lines cross. So you turn on the design origin here. Okay, right there. So if I'll tell you personally, I don't care to do that guessing game of, so is my needle right in the middle of the webbing or not? So what I tend to do is grab this and line it up so I can line the needle directly up with the bottom of this, of the webbing, physically on the machine. And then when I hit start, as long as my design's positioned along this vector here, then it will sew out where I want it to go. All right, so let's see. So I've got my vector just to simulate my webbing. I'll go create my text and let's make it a different color. And we'll put it centered on there and make it smaller. So to scale, if you just saw what I did there, I scaled it and it was uniform. So to do that, I held my control key, which locked, and my alternate key in scaling. So I select it, control alt, and that locks it. Okay, so shift alt there. All right, so shift alt. Get it positioned where you want. If you want it directly centered on the vector, you can select the text, hold your control key, select the vector, and then right here there's this fun little tool, center horizontally, and you can center vertically. So now when I go line my needle up on the machine and I set it right on the edge of the webbing, as long as I have it hoop straight, I do a trace and it will trace up right where I have that lettering placed. So other tricks with webbing that you can do is in your properties, make sure you're using horizontal stitch order of center out. You know, nylon particularly stretches a lot as it's sewing, so sewing center out will make sure that you don't end up with it drifting up or down one way or another. So I'd make sure you do that. Make sure you have good underlay. An edge walk is really helpful when you're working on there, when you're working on webbings of any sort, because it's got a lot of texture. You can also use topper, but I tend to just overdo it with underlay and avoid the topper myself. Okay, so that's what I would do to set it up. All right, so what else do we have? How do I make the toolbar and other things bigger? Went on vacation, came back to things smaller on the screen. That tends to be a compatibility issue with a 4K monitor. So I'll see if we can get you the help article on where to go find those settings. I would stumble around looking for them myself here, so I'll see if you can get that for you. Let's see. Where's a good place to get new embroidery fonts from, and roughly how much do they cost? No idea. I know there are a lot of places you can buy fonts, but when they save them off, they're saved as a bunch of DST files. So I know there's like Jolson Design sells them for what, $1 a piece sometimes on sale, but you end up with a gazillion DST files that have to be brought in one at a time. So it's not keyboard modifiable. So I don't know where you can find OFA or OFA files, which are the native to DesignShop, where you can find those. I know there are some digitizers that are working on fonts. I know Melco has a pack of new ones that they had for a while, and it looks like Jason or Joship put in the link to the compatibility on Facebook for you. we'll see about getting it over on YouTube as well. Okay. What else do we have? I think that's all the questions that were typed in. Yeah, all right, so back to my canned questions. I have a design that I need, wait, so that's the webbing, I did that one. All right, I have a design, I need to change the text. Once I do and press save, it adds color changes. Am I missing something? I've noticed that if I go and accidentally, when I'm changing colors, you can see here, this is all, yeah, Shauna, we'll get the compatibility article put over on YouTube as well. It might be after this if no one gets to it before I do. Okay. All right, so if you accidentally have these X's selected when you're adding colors, notice it adds additional colors on there. Okay, so you can always merge them together by selecting it and just picking any other single color. If it's an expanded file that you're modifying and there's extra trims in there, sometimes it'll break out the trims into separate colors. So you'll want to delete those because those just cause problems. You don't want any of those on there anyway. Okay. But no, I don't think you're missing anything. I think all you'd want to do is make sure whatever colors there are merged back together. So if you select everything and just give it a single color, then it'll go back to being one color instead of 5 colors if it's a 5-letter word, things like that. Okay. Can I talk about the difference between the different types of files? So this was also typed in of how do I pick a file that saves colors. So these are related questions. So embroidery files fundamentally come in 2 formats globally. I mean, if you just break them out in types, you've got your native, which are wireframe based, they're math based. As you scale things around, the math will automatically recalculate all the stitches because it's native to DesignShop. So those are wireframe based files, and those are going to be your OFM files, your CNDs. An older version is CND. All right, so that's where you have all the properties govern this so that it can recalculate the stitches as it goes. Now, the other types of files are what you see over here as expanded. So expanded files are just stitch files. It's literally coordinates of points telling where the machine's supposed to move. Go here, make a stitch. Go here, make a stitch, have a trim. Now, some of these files are more primitive than others, where they don't save any color information in them. It literally just has coordinates and trim information. So that's going to be your DST files, your EXPs. Those, they save no color information. All right, so if what you're wanting is to open up a file and have it show colors, then that's not going to be it. It's going to always open up in crazy colors, whatever the software wants for, color 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, so it's going to look funny. What you can do is art files. Let's see, art, HUS, JEF, HUS, JEF, PES. All of those save color within the file. All right, so you can open those, and some, depending on what the digitizer used, some of them actually save the color, or what even the digitizer used for threads within their software. Sometimes they save over a little bit funny, but they're at least way closer to the original colors. And sometimes they're right on. It really depends on what software the person's using, of how they convert over. But, I put this here just for entertainment's sake, but in general, if you can get away with using your native files, like your OFMs, those are better to use because you have your all the information needed for it to be able to calculate stitches. So if you scale up or down, if you want to change your underlay, if you want to change your density, it's all easy to do. When you're dealing with stitch files, you're expanded, you're really limiting yourself on how much you can scale, and just the different things that can happen with it. All right, so let's see, someone typed in, when using, this is off Facebook, when using OS version 12 for Bravo, how do you set the thread tree? I don't have that up here. I know on the older version, you would have to open up a file that had the colors saved on it. So you go into DesignShop, make a 16 color file with the colors you want. And then on that bottom part where you go select, You've got, let's see, do I have a picture here rather than waving my hands? No, I don't. All right. When you go to set the colors, you know, you have your color list here. Down at the bottom, it's like active colors or design colors. Well, those 12, if you click on one of those boxes and then click on the tree over in the other corner, it would color the dots for you. So that was kind of the workaround I had. But I don't have it here to be able to show you. All right. Another question off YouTube. Can you show how to break an element into 2 separate regions? Of course. All right. So let's go draw a shape. Oops. I'm going to draw a complex fill, and I'm going to be boring and make it a square. All right. So let's say I want to split it from this point to that point. So I added those points just by left clicking on it. So I click on one, hold my control key down, and click on the other. So now both of them are selected black. From there, right here, there's this change element from one type to the other. If I hold it down, you'll see that there's this other one, split element at selected point. Now I have 2 shapes that I can give 2 different colors. That also works with my single lines. So let's say I've got a single line, which is just a constant with satin stitch. And let's say I want to split it at this point here. Well, if I click on that point to highlight it and then choose the split element at selected points, now it's broken into 2 segments. Okay. I'm new to my machine, have version 10 basic. Do I have the same option to change things? Yeah. So V10, are you talking about V10 OS or V10 DesignShop? So V10 DesignShop is what I'm working here. DesignShop is what you digitize in. The OS is what you run the machine from. So the OS isn't going to be a digitizing tool for you. It's just basically set colors and adjust things at the machine. But here, you know, if you've got just DesignShop Lite, you can do some minimal things. You can't digitize, but you can change properties of things. Okay. Let's see, back to my PowerPoint. We talked about that. All right, in envelope, can I select these 2 points and move them symmetrically? Sure. So let's go do that. I need help. All right, that makes me giggle. Sorry. All right, so typed in the text. I'm going to go to Properties, and I'm going to change my line type to envelope. When you do that, you'll see now I have a line at the top and the bottom. So just, if you've not used it, it's fun. I can add a right click there. If I hold my control key, click and drag, notice it does a nice little arch. All right. Well, if I want to move these 2 points together, I need to select them together. How do you select multiple things? You're going to hold the control key down on your keyboard. So select your shape, select the point you want. So you've got the first one selected, hold your control key down, select the other one. Now both of those are black, they're both selected. Now if I click on it, I can move them both around and it will hold them uniform. Okay, that way they'll move together. All right, so yes, nothing there, nothing there. Oops, or is there? Nope. All right. How to make a satin stitch outline with rounded corners. Okay, this one I'll show you what they're asking. So I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to do a complex fill with a square or a rectangle shape. So draw myself a rectangle shape, center it so it's I want it to be matching to my grid. All right, so I got a rectangle centered that now matches my grid. All right, so the question is, how do I round all these corners out? So you don't have to bring in art to trace, but here's a trick you can do. So if I take this and I have my grid on, that's why I wanted this lined up to a grid, I can add a left click there and a left click here. That's basically 1/2 inch from each corner. Now when I select this point, if I hold my control key down when I move it, it's going to make that a nice smooth rounded shape. Okay, so just drag it in and that will give me a nice round shape there. Someone asked, is it standard practice to always add a satin border around fill stitch elements? Standard practice, I think a lot of people do it. I wouldn't say it's standard, but I would say more people than not do. I know I've found applications where I don't want to add a border around it for whatever reason. So it really depends on the art that you're doing. Okay, so again, to do this same little add a corner trick, I'm going to add my 2 points, select this guy here, hold my control key and move it in. And if you move it in along that diagonal on the grid, then it will be uniform. So again, click, click, select my point, hold my control key. Yeah, here. So, almost got it done. Let's go like there. No, just hold your control key as you're moving it. There. You got a rounded corner shape. All right, and let's say I want to add a border around this. How do you do that fast? Well, I can hold the shift key down and click right here on the single line center, and it adds a single line center around that guy. I can make it a little bit wider to 40 points, and give it another color so you can actually see it. There you go. All right. Let's see, what other questions do we have? Oh, how do I slant letters? Like a 7, I need to do, okay, left and right slants. So, go back to DesignShop. It said the number 7, so I guess I'm going to take that literally. So if we need to slant this guy, so if I go to Properties, double click on it, whatever, right here is Slant. Let's say I want to do a 20-degree slant. So that's pushed it off to the right. -20 goes the opposite way. Okay, so positive, you can use negative numbers to go to the left, positive numbers to go to the right. If you really just want to mirror this, create one, copy, paste. So I did that by doing Control-C, Control-V, or you can right-click and go to duplicate. Okay, from this one, down here, I can mirror and then just move it over. So if that's what you're going for. But if you really want it to be an actual 7 and not backwards like this, you would just slant it the other way by using a negative number. Okay. That is all the questions I had sent in ahead of time, plus the ones y'all have typed in. So let me quick scan through and see if I missed anything in my hasty scrolling. Nothing there. Looking at through Facebook. Talked about that. So type stuff in while I'm scrolling in case you have more questions. We did that. We did that. Okay. I think I got all the questions that were typed in. Ah, how do you combine colors or have less colors changes? Okay, so let's go do that. So I'm going to make these different colors just so I have something to merge around. Okay, so let's say I want to merge these together. Several ways you can do it. See this thing right here? That's going to take this color and throw it and merge it to the one above it. Okay, so if I click on that little icon right there, now it merged it up. I can do that again to merge it up. Now, what if rather than that, I want to just select these? So I can either select by holding the control key down. See, so I can select this one and this one, holding control, or select the first one, hold shift down to the bottom, and right there, they're all selected. So I can come over here and then just give it another color. And now all 3 of those items are now one color rather than 3. Now, let's say we've got I don't know, this sewing, yeah, let's say we're doing it like, I don't know, these black and these white, let's say. Okay, so if you want to do less color changes, you can't merge this up because it's got something in the way, right? But I could take this one and reorder it by left clicking on it and dragging it up, and now letting it go. Now the two black ones are on top of each other, and I can merge those two together. So now that's one color change, and I can merge this one. So now instead of 4 color changes, this is down to 2. Now, keep in mind when you're doing things like that, pay attention to the design and to make sure you're not making a mess of the file. So for instance, let's say, all right, let me give these some more color changes. All right, let's say for whatever reason, I want those 2 pairs the same color as the bird. Well, if I drag these down and sew them later so that I can merge those guys together, look what happened. It's putting these running stitches on top because it's not intended to be sewn in that order. It's supposed to sew before the leaves do. So you've got to be careful that you're paying attention to, paying attention to where you're dropping these files to make sure that the running stitches or other travel stitches, don't put it out of order so that it sews wrong. So just keep that in mind as you're reorganizing things, that sometimes you may have to have more color changes than needed. Someone says they're having a problem with small lettering. I've tried micro fonts and it still isn't really clear. So there is a presentation, it's like 45 minutes long, that Scott did a while back on micro lettering that I would highly recommend watching it. It talks about it in some great detail. Fundamentally, to make small lettering clean, what you need to do is make sure you're using a small needle, 65/9, and you're using smaller thread. So a 60 weight thread rather than a 40 weight thread, particularly when you're trying to do that really tiny stuff. I always think of it as, imagine trying to draw something tiny with a Sharpie. It's not going to happen. Thick thread is kind of to that same analogy where you're trying to draw something really small with something really thick. It's not going to translate well. So by going to the thinner thread, now you've got your finer sharpened pencil that you can do tiny lettering on. So someone did put that link in for that article for you. There's a document out there that talks about it. There's some tips and tricks, the different needles and threads. Scott goes into the digitizing of, how you do the underlay, how you deal with pull compensation and those sorts of things. So check those out. If that still doesn't cover it, let us know, and we'll be, let us know what you're asking, and we can see if we can go over it again a little bit differently for you. All right. Yay, I'm glad everyone's enjoying these streams. I hope they're helpful for y'all. Yeah, 60 weight thread helps a lot. They do make a 70 weight thread too. I bought some just to play with, and I did some really cute tiny stuff. It was a little ridiculous. I don't know what I'd ever use it for practically, but it was fun to do. Yeah. So let's see. Next week we will be back and we'll be talking about whatever questions you might have again next week. Today's Friday, so next week we'll probably do this on Thursday. We'll see, but we'll post regardless and let y'all know. So I will talk to you again next time. Happy sewing, digitize, have fun. I will talk to you guys next week. All right, bye.